A 2.8 trillion parameter model just launched, claiming the biggest open crown in AI history. You can't download a single weight of it yet. Moonshot AI put Kimi K3 up for public testing at Wake in Shanghai this week. And by Friday half, the internet was calling it the model that beat Claude Fable 5 and GPT 5.6. Run the actual scoreboard, and that claim breaks by the second benchmark. Okay, so this is Moonshot AI, the Beijing lab backed by Alibaba that's been losing ground since DeepSeek's run last year. Kimi K3 landed on July 16th. 2.8 trillion parameters. Timed to hit right before the World AI Conference kicked off in Shanghai. It's their comeback swing after 18 rough months. Right now, it's available two ways, through Kimi's own chat product and through an APY. And that's it. No download link. Not yet. Moonshot also calls this the first open 3T class model. That's 2.8 trillion, rounded up. The class is doing some of the same work the open was doing a paragraph ago. Here's the part that needs correcting before any benchmark talk. The press called this the largest open source model ever within a day of launch. Moonshot itself said open weight, which is a different claim entirely. Open weight means you'll eventually get the trained parameters to run yourself. Open source, in the strict sense researchers use, means you also get the training data and the code that built it, and Moonshot has never released either for any Kimi model. So call it the largest open weight model. And the weights themselves don't land until July 27th. 11 days after a launch, everyone's already covering like it shipped in full. There's also a government evaluation of this exact lab's last model that's worth bringing in once the coding numbers are on the table. If you've been quietly watching your Claude or GPT-5.6 API bill climb and hoping an open model would finally let you swap it out, K3's headline was built for you specifically. And here's the naive version of that move. You see the parameter count, you see open, you point your traffic at it, and you assume the savings are automatic. They're not silently. The model is still API only today, priced closer to what you were already paying than to what K2 promised a year ago, and self-hosting it requires hardware most teams don't own. You don't find that out from the headline. You find it 3 invoices later. So what actually decides whether this model is any good? Kimi K3 uses a mixture of experts design, which is an architecture that splits the model into hundreds of specialist subnetworks and only wakes a handful of them for any word you type in, the way a call center routes your question to the 2 agents who know the answer instead of putting the whole floor on the line. K3 carries 896 of these experts and activates just 16 per token. That's how a 8 trillion parameter model avoids running 2.8 trillion parameters of compute at once. It also runs on Kimi Delta Attention, a modified version of the mechanism that decides which earlier words in a conversation still matter. It's built to stay fast even past 1 million tokens of context. 1 million tokens is roughly a shelf of novels. K3 holds all of it at once. But Moonshot's own launch material recommends at least 64 accelerators, industrial-grade GPUs, just to serve the thing. This was never going to run on your laptop. Hold on to that number. 64 accelerators changes who this is actually for, and I'll get to that in a second. Now, the honest part, because beat Claude Fable and GPT 5.6, is doing a lot of work in that headline. On GDP Vol AA, a benchmark that scores models against real work across 44 occupations and 9 industries, K3 landed an ELO of 1,687. Third place, behind Fable 5 Max at 1,015. Behind Sol Max, just under 1,748. That's a 128-point gap to Fable alone. Artificial analysis runs its own composite too, the Intelligence Index, and K3 scores 57 there. 4th out of 189 models tracked, behind Fable and behind 2 separate GPT 5.6 Sol settings. On a separate long horizon knowledge work evaluation, the same tracker put K3 at an ELO of 1,547, a jump of 732 points from the prior Kimi generation, and still behind only Fable. Even Simon Willison, an independent developer whose benchmark write-ups get widely read, summed up Moonshot's own numbers the same way: beating Opus, losing to Fable and Sol. So the honest version is this: K3 didn't beat Fable or Sol. It landed just behind both, ahead of Claude Opus 4.8. Still a real result, just not the one in the title. Third, not first. Twice, where K3 does lead is narrower than the composite scores suggest. Across 6 coding benchmarks, it topped the field on 2, SWE Marathon and Program Bench. It trailed GPT-5.6 Sol on Terminal Bench 2.1 by half a point. Its coding agent, Kimi K3, picked up more than 100 stars on GitHub within days, and plugs into VS Code, Cursor, and Zed. Pricing sits at $3 per million input tokens and 15 per million output. Independent trackers call that Sonnet class pricing, not the near-free story K2 told a year ago. Cost per completed task lands around 94 cents, close to Sol's roughly $1, and about half of what Opus 4.8 runs. That's a real invoice argument. It's just a modest one, not a demolition. Teams already paying Sonnet class rates for a coding assistant get a lateral move here, not a windfall, and the difference shows up mostly in which 2 coding benchmarks you happen to care about. So a few asterisks before you route anything through it. First, most of those coding numbers are Moonshot's own harness, run at maximum thinking effort, and several haven't shown up on the benchmark owner's live boards yet. Second, it's not fast. Independent testing clocked output at 62 tokens a second, below the 73.7 median for models in its price tier, with close to 2 seconds before the first token even shows up. Third, upstream hosting capacity is thin enough that Access is already throwing frequent errors under load. Fourth, and this one's worth remembering, the last time a US government body looked closely at a Kimi model, that was K2 thinking back in November of 2025, the finding was that it lagged leading US systems on cyber and software engineering tasks, behind even older models. K3 hasn't had that kind of independent scrutiny yet. And the biggest asterisk, the efficiency claims Moonshot leans on hardest, the ones about cutting cache use and decoding faster, those specific numbers come from a smaller research model in the same family, not from K3 itself. K3 specific figures on that front are still waiting on the technical report. Treat every one of those efficiency numbers as a preview, not a spec, until that report lands with K3's own name attached to them. So here's the fork, and it's a real one. If you wanted K3 the way you wanted K2, cheap and self-hostable on hardware you already own, that's not available today and won't be cheap once it is. 64 accelerators is a data center commitment, not a home lab one. Pick the API now if you need frontier-adjacent coding help at Sonnet class pricing, and you're fine sending prompts to Moonshot's servers. Pick Fable or Sol if the composite score is what you're actually optimizing for, since both still sit ahead of K3 on every major leaderboard published so far. And if you were planning to wait for July 27th and self-host this on a couple of consumer cards, if that's you, this isn't the model you're waiting for. Most people reading a headline like this fall into the first camp or the third, not the second, and that's fine. You're just not who this launch was really for. If you're an actual enterprise team weighing a data residency argument, the calculus is different again, since a self-hostable frontier-adjacent model changes what you can promise a compliance officer, even at 64 accelerators. That's a narrow buyer. It's a real one. Zoom out, and this isn't really about one model's scoreboard position. Moonshot spent the 18 months after DeepSeek's breakout watching its market share erode. And K3 is the swingback, timed deliberately to land during Wake in Shanghai. It's also the latest move in a race among Chinese labs to claim largest open before Western labs ship anything comparable at all. K2 held that title at 1 trillion parameters last year, 32 billion of them active per token. K3 nearly triples the total count and scales the active count up right alongside it. The pattern is escalating faster than any single lab's benchmark wins, and that race, not any one ELO number, is the actual story here. Every few months, the ceiling on Open moves again, and every time it does, a Western Labs pricing page looks a little more exposed. So, where I land. The specific claim in that headline, that K3 beat Fable and Sol, is overstated, and the scoreboard says so twice over. But the model underneath it, a fourth-place Frontier result from an open weight lab running a trillion-scale mixture of experts' design that used to be exclusive to labs spending 10 times the money, that part is real, and it's not going away. So what to watch? To know if any of this holds. First, whether independent boards publish matching K3 scores with traces, run counts, and cost data once the July 27th weights actually land, instead of everyone quietly repeating Moonshot's own numbers. Second, whether that modified MIT license shows up exactly as described, with no surprise restriction buried in the fine print the way there sometimes is with releases out of this region. It used to be whether an open weight lab could even reach the Frontier composite score. Now it's just whether you'll be able to download the thing that got there.